I'm flying the flag of the Roman Empire for this video to serve as a reminder of the historic foundations of our Western civilization, that being the Roman Empire and of course the Greeks before them, as those laid the foundation of our great civilization, of which we now seem to be facing its demise. I cannot think of one institution that has played a more crucial role in the rot that has set in than our institutions of so-called higher learning, and specifically the so-called humanities. For a historic perspective, we need to remember that from antiquity up to the times we live in today, the aristocrats and the wealthy had the advantage that their children will inherit their fortunes, thereby ensuring the economic survival and welfare of their offspring. For the masses who do not own such capital abundance, there has never been this level of transgenerational security to ensure the economic survival of their children. So how did the less well-to-do ensure the future of their offspring? Of course they had their own strategies. Tradesmen would from early on impart their skills to their child. If the father was an ironsmith, then one or two of his sons would learn the trade from early on. When the time comes, they would replace their father in delivering that service to the village. In those days, the mortality rate of babies was very high, and this would to some extent compensate for the lack of contraception. Yet, the village could only sustain so many ironsmiths, and therefore some of the children would end up as labourers for others in the village, or they would become soldiers, or end up as monks or nuns in monasteries. Due to the high mortality rate of women during childbirth, the demand for wives would always be relatively high, ensuring a market value for them as mothers and homemakers. Even the peasants and serfs who worked the land for the feudal landlords would be ensured a future in peasantry or serfdom. And though the latter was the least preferred solution, it was nevertheless a sufficient solution for survival. Of course, today this is all very different. Since the advent of industrialization and subsequent modernization, we saw the rise of the modern working and middle classes. The modern capitalist economy has brought untold levels of economic growth and wealth to the Western world. Unlike the working classes, the work of the new middle classes became increasingly sophisticated. In this type of economy, the transfer of skills from parent to child is no longer a practical strategy. This has created a new form of vulnerability. The middle classes and the working classes cannot ensure the economic future of their offspring. This situation becomes even more peculiar with the advent of globalization and the export of work to the sweatshop economies. Industrial workers became increasingly redundant, rendering very limited opportunities for their children. In the meantime, the situation for the offspring of the Western globalist elite has only gone from strength to strength. Since the Second World War, a growing middle class increasingly relied on the institutions of tertiary study to furnish their children with knowledge and skills to ensure their employability. Initially, and appropriately so, the focus was on education in employable professions such as medicine, teaching, accounting, clerical work, and other professional and semi-professional fields of the time. As the economy boomed in the second half of the 20th century, the need for a learned corporate bureaucratic class who did not require very specific skills increased. Students could now enter an array of university programs that did not train them any specific economic skills, but provided them levels of critical thinking and the ability to analyze complex situations as was required for a burgeoning corporate and governmental managerial class in the modern economy. But we're not talking in mere sociological terms here. These are actual people. They are the youth, our future. To give psychological context, let's briefly look at this target population. Teenagers and those in their early 20s has an evolutionary drive towards peer association as well as the assertion of their independence from their parents. In primitive times, which is the bulk of our existence as a species, such assertion was important as it was the age at which a girl becomes fertile and needs to associate with her mate. The male youngster who matures slightly later needs to join the other males in hunting expeditions and find a mate and procreate. The earlier this can happen, of course, the better for the survival of the species. This might sound all very academic and maybe irrelevant, but actually it manifests in a very peculiar way in our time. In modern man, youngsters become economically viable much later than in primitive times. Such late economic maturity is contradictory to our evolution. The prolonged dependence of the youngster on their parents leads to frustration within, which leads to bouts of aggression and the challenging of authority. The parents and society experience this as rebelliousness. By the time the youngster enters tertiary studies, he is fully frustrated and in a state of defiance to his elders. Such defiance is psychological and renders him susceptible to influences which would serve as allies in his psychological liberation from his parents over their extended influence in his life. As with all vulnerable spots in humanity, there is always a vulture ready to prey off the situation. From the late 1940s up till the 1980s, the Soviet Union, via its intelligence service, the KGB, created a covert international campaign to subvert Western culture. The subversion had to be both moral and intellectual. For this purpose, communist sympathizers were recruited in all influential Western institutions, and this included churches, universities, media, the entertainment sector, state bureaucracies, and various others. Senator Joe McCarthy in the United States spearheaded a campaign to root out this evil Marxist influence. Senator McCarthy seemingly overplayed his hand, became discredited, and thus lost this campaign. This marked the start of the victory of Soviet influence over Western institutions and the unbridled communization of American intelligentsia and all spheres supplied by them. In the US, it was given an additional boost by foreign policy disasters such as the war in Vietnam, with many of the young becoming super susceptible for Marxist radicalization. Internationally, it used the anti-apartheid campaign to galvanize all its adherents and many unsuspecting members of the populace into subverting the anti-communist and supposedly racist Republic of South Africa, but also to set up strawmen in America and Europe to boost the undermining of those societies. Today, the Soviet vulture is dead, and thank God for that. However, its spirit lives on in our Western institutions, and it is desperately trying to reincarnate itself as reality of state, government, and as a total societal order. Its attempted reincarnation is, however, infinitely worse than the original version, which was already very bad. As unlike the Soviets wanted for their land, the current Marxists want to import the entire third world to become part of the socialist utopia. That these deranged leftists clearly do not understand economics goes without saying. The Soviet virus must be decimated or it will destroy our civilization. Since the economic boom of the second half of the 20th century in the West, the demand for a bureaucratic middle class saw an extraordinary rise in the popularity of both social sciences and business sciences in Western universities. Especially the social sciences, and by the way, there is very little scientific about them, served as a massive platform for the accelerated Marxist corruption of Western youth for almost 3 generations. This brings us back to the rebellious nature of the youth, as this disposition is instrumental in twisting their minds with half-baked Marxist absurdities. They are like sponges absorbing the subversive ideas dished up by their Marxist